CEOTalks has been one of the I guess, courses, whatever you want to call it. But we've had some really cool people come in. We've got some really neat individuals coming up, and Janet Hanson is one that Megan, myself, a couple other individuals had the pleasure to meet. We're actually running a program for 85 Broads as one of our loyalty clients. And Janet has a tremendous background being one of the most successful individuals on Wall Street, especially at Goldman Sachs. But her stories, I mean, I'll let her tell it, were just incredible of the reasons why she chose the path of what she's done so far in her life. She's the CEO of 85 Broads, which is the largest professional women's organization. And when we met, where we probably connected the most was on the topic of human capital and what we call human capital engineering. And we shared a lot of similar sort of values and beliefs in this field. We both sort of love Jim Lehrer and kind of what he's done. So with that, we felt the connection. We've been keeping in touch quite a bit, and so thought it'd be phenomenal to get Janet, who is not only one of the more successful individuals I've met, as a female leader, also very inspirational to a lot of our women in the company as well. So with that, I will turn over to Jen.
Thank you, Janet. Hi guys. We had a power breakfast this morning in New York City, so my day started really early, and it was a fascinating breakfast. We were actually talking about and with a guy by the name of Andy Ratcliffe, who is the CEO of Wealthfront. They're out in Silicon Valley, and whenever you have somebody from Silicon Valley come and speak, it's all about disruption. And I'm like, enough, right? So I love that. But he gave a very, very interesting talk about, there's going to be, and I think this is germane to this conversation. He was talking about the explosive creation of wealth in Silicon Valley, and the next big liquidity moment, as everybody knows, is going to be when Facebook IPOs at some point this spring. And you hear the funny stories about how, the guy who did the mural took stock instead of cash, so he's now worth $200 million, or will be soon. And I actually have a great friend who was at Stanford Graduate School of Business and would have been about the 20th employee at Facebook, and turned it down to do something that eventually went under. So he needs therapy for the rest of his natural life. He just writes that down every day, going like, about $2.5 billion. Like, so it's interesting. It's interesting because we're part of our focus is what is going on in Silicon Valley, and how does that culture differ from the East Coast. So I'm born and bred New Yorker. I grew up in Hastings-on-Hudson, New York, which is about a half hour outside of New York City. And I like to say that that I became a serial networker when I was 7 or 8 years old, and my parents were very social people. And so they would have cocktail parties, and they would make my brother and sister and I, give out, the carrots and crackers and stuff. And then you'd have to refresh people's drinks. And that meant that you had to talk. You had to actually converse with the people that were at my parents' cocktail parties. They expected you to talk to them. And so the thing that was great about these cocktail parties is that my brother and sister and I would then, I shouldn't say this, this is a very healthy place, but we'd go, outside, smoke the rest of the cigarette butts, then they would burn down this and drink whatever was left in the glasses. So that was how I started my career as a networker. I went to Hastings High School, and about 90 people in my class. Mark Zuckerberg went to Dobbs Ferry High School right next door. Obviously, he was there much after I was at Hastings, but interesting to grow up, outside of New York City. So I went to Wheaton College because I was a hellion in high school. I did not distinguish myself in high school. I was a jock. That was a good thing. Not much of a student. So I ended up going to Wheaton College. It's a women's college, was a women's college in Norton, Massachusetts. I went there, it was sort of like the penitentiary for me. There were no guys, there's nothing to do there. Norton is not a terribly exciting town. But it was a really, really interesting experience because you know, I was trying to say, okay, this is sort of weird because there are no guys here. But it was sort of an interesting experiment, which was, you know, do women really like each other? Do they help each other? And for the most part, I found during my 4 years at Wheaton College, the answer was no, they didn't. And so that sort of bummed me out, but it also gave me a real opportunity to figure out who I was. And because I didn't have to put makeup on in the classroom or, you know, to see boys or whatever, so that was actually a good thing. And then I went back to Hastings. And my lifelong ambition was to run the pro shop at the St. Andrews Golf Club. And it's the oldest men's golf club in America. It was founded in 1861. And so I just decided this was for me, and I was going to go on the, on the golf tour and become a great golfer, and that was my ambition. I was a Govey major, there we go, at Wheaton, and had looked for a job sort of in Washington, didn't find one. I got a job working at the Department of Education and Cultural Affairs for $1,800 a year. I was like, that won't even cover my bar bill. I can't work there. So I came back home, and I was at St. Andrews, and one of the members walked in, and he said, "You're too smart to be here." And I said, "Well, no, actually, this really works for me. I really like it here. I play a lot of golf, and the members are really nice." He said, "I want you to come and work for me at McGraw-Hill." And I said, "No, thank you. Do not want to work. No. I don't want to work in a corporation. I think that book thing that you're doing down there is probably pretty cool, but that's not for me." So anyway, about a week later, I started working at McGraw-Hill. And Dan Crowley was the number 2 guy there. He was the VP of Finance. And he reported directly to Harold McGraw. And sure enough, as I had expected, the job was incredibly boring. And I said, I don't want to be inside. I want to be outside. I want to be active, right? I want to be able to go play golf. I want to be able to hang out, right? And so being in the corporate world back then was I mean, the work wasn't interesting, and it was it wasn't a welcoming culture for young people. So after a couple of months, it was clear that I was totally bored. And Dan said, "Well, it's time for you to go to business school." And I said, "Well, great, great, sounds good. That means I can leave." And so I told him, I said, "Well, I'll apply to George Washington University because they're in Georgetown, close to all my friends, can hang out, go to the bars, have a good time." He said, "No, you're going to Columbia Business School." And I said, "Dan, time out, dude. Okay, I stopped taking math in the 10th grade. So that is totally not going to happen." And so anyway, I said, okay, fine, I'll apply. So I applied to Columbia Business School. And I got a letter back, and it said, "If you take macroeconomics and calculus on a graduate level, get an A in both courses, we will admit you." So they sat there and they said, "Won't be seeing her anytime soon." And this was the first time I said, this brought out sort of like the competitive freak in me. And so I said, okay, I'm going to do that. And I took those courses, I got an A in both. And I said, here I am. And so they were incredibly surprised to see me. First of all, there were not that many women going to business school way back then. This was in the mid-70s. And I didn't distinguish myself academically. I'm pretty sure I graduated at the bottom of my class. I was the youngest person there. I was only 22 when I went to Columbia Business School. And I really struggled because all my classmates had vast work experience. And so it was 2 years of being completely tortured. And I can remember when I went to my accounting class on the first day, and my professor, Joel Burke, said, "Okay, let's start at chapter 5. And I went, "Professor Burke." I said, "Excuse me, what happened to the first 4 chapters?" He goes, "Everybody already knows all that." I was like, oh, I'm so screwed. I'm in so much trouble. So anyway, I survived that. And then the obvious question is, how did I end up at Goldman Sachs? And this is where this, I think, is a really interesting story. It's the power of networking. And when you're young, right, you get to network with your peers. And of course, we didn't have social media back then. There was no Facebook. There was almost nothing. There were no cell phones. So it was really incumbent on the individual to figure out how to network. And what does networking really mean? It means having a meaningful conversation where both people are getting something in return. And so, you know, almost everything that I've ever done that was successful, I took an investment approach to, whether it was a relationship or, you know, hopefully, you know, throughout my career path. But I said, I want to invest in this person, or I want to invest in this opportunity, you know, or I want to invest in my family. And it's a really kind of an interesting, I think pretty edgy thought, because then it's not random, right? You're making a conscious decision to invest in relationships and people that matter. And so when I was a junior, I actually spent only 3 of my 4 years at Wheaton. I spent 1 year at Mills College, which is in Oakland, California. It's also a women's college. And my boyfriend lived in San Diego, so I said, well, I'll go to college in California. Well, Oakland is up here, San Diego is down here, so it was rather poor planning on my part. But I met this really great gal by the name of Ann Whitehead. And we became great friends, and I went back to Wheaton. She went to Stanford. She spent her last 2 years at Stanford. So anyway, in the winter of 1973, so I'm back at Wheaton now, and she calls me and she said, you know, we're going on this incredibly boring sailing trip in the West Indies on a yacht. And she said, do you want to come? She goes, I know you don't want to come. It's with my family. I'm like, are you kidding me? I've been like to Buffalo and Oakland, and that's it, right? And I wasn't kidding. So I said, I would love to come. I would absolutely love to come. So, I get on this yacht, and Ann's father is a guy by the name of John Whitehead. And I don't know anybody that works on Wall Street. Don't know. Nobody in my family worked on Wall Street. So anyway, it turns out that John was the head of investment banking at Goldman Sachs. And so he said, okay, for the next 2 weeks while we're on this boat, you are going to be my bridge partner. Right? This is a very serious guy. It's really intense. He's a banker, okay? And so he took this whole thing was going to be very serious. I was going to be his bridge partner. So I was like such a complete nervous wreck. I actually did know how to play bridge. And that went okay. And we had a really, really cool time. At the end of that trip, he said, if you ever decide to go to business school, I'd love to have you come and work for me at Goldman Sachs. And I said, well, this has been great. If you ever have another sailing trip, definitely count me in, right? So just thinking to myself, you know, see ya, this has been real. The thing that made that such an extraordinary 2 weeks was that John Whitehead was in the U.S. Navy, and he was in he was in the Navy, and he was part of the D-Day landing. My dad was an officer in the Navy during World War II, and so we found points of common interest. And what he could not believe, I was 19 at the time, was that I actually had something to say. And not to say that his own 2 children didn't find him all that fascinating. But he was just blown away that somebody so young could have a conversation about naval history. I also knew how to navigate by the stars. I'd been taught that by my dad, right? So there were aspects of my personality that he found utterly fascinating, and I found him to be utterly fascinating as well. So one of the things that has really guided me throughout my career is, 1, take an investment approach to everything you do, and 2 is be tirelessly and insatiably curious. And back before we had the internet, we had pretty much radio, books, and black and white TV. So you really had to have a huge imagination, right? Because it wasn't being fed to you, so you had to figure out how to make life interesting. And so, the long and short of it is, I did go to Goldman Sachs, and I did call John Whitehead. And so I ended up going into sales and trading, which was absolutely the perfect place for me to be. It's it's like a football field, and everybody sits very close to each other. And the great thing about being a woman in that business, I was the second woman they hired in fixed income, was that you could overhear so many of the conversations. This is clutch. Back in those days, right, since a very male-dominated firm, right, to be able to overhear conversations of your colleagues and your bosses, right, because all the partners actually sat out on the trading floor. So I had an 11-year run at Goldman Sachs that was just nothing short of spectacular. And it was because I was curious in terms of what everybody was doing. I'm like, I want to understand your position, right? And so I probably could have been, somebody could have tagged me as being a real pest. But it was because I was curious. Well, what is that really? What is curiosity? When you're asking somebody to tell you about what they do or their expertise, it's paying respect, right? And if there is a way that you can cultivate a relationship around your respect for somebody's body of work, right? And so why am I here today? Right? We had this power breakfast, as you know, this morning. I've been on the road like crazy, right? And I would have driven here from Timbuktu because Charlie asked me to. Now, we've only met once. He is by far, right, you don't have to listen, one of the most thoughtful, extraordinary people I've met in a long time. And I'm fascinated by how his brain works, by the vision of what he and all of you guys are creating at this company. And I got to tell you something. After I did my Goldman thing, then we launched Milestone Capital. Worked really, really hard. I was the CEO of Milestone. It was a small, mostly ex-Goldman team. We ramped it up to, it was a $3 billion institutional fund business at its absolute peak. I then went on and really distinguished myself by working for Joe Gregory, who was the Chief Operating Officer and President of Lehman Brothers. And there's been a lot read, said about the demise of Lehman. Why did it fail? And if somebody ever asked me, I certainly wouldn't say this probably to somebody in the media, but Joe's passion was around building the best workforce on Wall Street. And so the reason he hired me, he said, I don't want to lose another great woman to Goldman. He said, here's what happens. When somebody has 2 job offers, one from Goldman, one from Lehman, they go to Goldman. And I said, well, Joe, it's perception versus reality. The perception is that Goldman is the best place on Wall Street to work. The reality, perhaps, is that Lehman is the best place to work. And so we had this fascinating conversation. And Joe was President and Chief Operating Officer. As the COO, he needed to be really on top of all the businesses, right? He really enjoyed being the visionary, right? And he probably wasn't paying quite as much attention to each individual division. And so there's a lot been written, about, well, Joe should have had Dick's back and, yada, yada, yada. The key is you have to have great people. Now, I would like to think that we did actually bring in some really fabulous women, but the conversation that I have had and had with Charlie is around the hiring process around this place, right? I couldn't work here, right? And that's what I mean. I'm really now not being facetious. You know how you say now about, like, when somebody says, well, what would be the chances of you getting into, I don't know, Georgia Tech today? They're like, how about 0, right? Because getting into college today is incredibly competitive and it's incredibly difficult, so you have to be incredibly special. And then, if you're incredibly special and you go to college, and then you have an opportunity to work at a great company like this, let me tell you something, right? And Charlie didn't pay me to say this. You know, I was out in Palo Alto over during Christmas time, and got to spend a lot of time at Google. Because I have a whole bunch of friends that work at Google. And I'd never been to the Googleplex before. I was like, this is sick. This is sick. Okay, so you walk in, first thing I see is a hammock, I see a massage table. I think they may have had a full spa, I don't know. And then I saw the chute, that so you can just like, why bother with the stairs? Take the chute, right? And it was so interesting to me because it's like Disneyland. It's like Disneyland. And you know, I thought, wow, and you're supposed to be wowed. And yet I was so much more impressed when I came here. And I think it's this culture around, it's a more holistic culture around well-being, right? So it's how do you be the best possible you? How do you invest in you, in your colleagues, in your family? So I hear about Loved It. I'm like, oh my God, I've like never heard of a company doing that before. That is just such an amazingly cool concept. And so at the end of the day, what just really blows my mind, and I asked Charlie this, it's got to be a Harvard Business School case about next jump, right? It's all about how do you become the happiest person that you can possibly be, right? And I have to tell you, I haven't figured that out. The one thing that I did figure out, and the reason why I launched 85 Broads, which by the way is just a riff on Goldman's former headquarter address, which is 85 Broad Street. But after I left Goldman to be at home with my kids, I almost killed myself. I mean, I almost went stark raving mad. And it's in this book, which is, you can buy this on Amazon for about 50 cents, more than 85 Broads, and I wrote the first chapter. I miss being around really smart people. And one of the hardest things that I found was when you're in college, you're with really smart people. And then you ask yourself that question, like, how did they ever let me in here, right? Because there's always somebody, a whole bunch of somebody smarter than you, right? And then you go and work at a company that has brilliant people, right? And then you sort of have this sense that maybe, you know, any place you work, that there are always going to be brilliant people. Well, the sad thing is, that is usually not the case most of the time. So, you know, the proverbial, you know, takeaway from 40,000 feet is sort of, I used to sit there and almost like pinch myself that I was at Goldman. And the reason why I did, and this is again when the firm was privately held, it was a very different firm. In fact, when I got there were less than 1,000 people at the firm worldwide, right? But I felt like I had made it to the majors because everybody that I worked with was thinking and innovating and creating. And when I got to fixed income, we were the only division losing money. So it really was incumbent upon everybody to try to come up with great solutions to figure out how we could make fixed income, how we could make our division profitable, because we were a joke. I mean, every other division of the firm was making money except us. We were the youngest division. We had the youngest people, you know, so we weren't the stuffy bankers. We weren't in research. And when people say, oh, you must have hated it there because it was like mostly guys, I was like, are you kidding me? It was like being in a laboratory because we were constantly trying to create, you know, what our clients needed. And so much of what I think is fun in life, right, is to always be thinking, what do your clients want? You know, and how do you deliver excellence day in and day out? And if a whole bunch of really smart people are sitting around a table trying to figure that out, it's pretty cool. So I would end with that. The only other thing that I would say is the single biggest investment I ever made was in my children. And my son is a junior at Dartmouth. My daughter went to Wheaton, but only because it's co-ed now, and she's an artist. And if you ever get one thing right, invest in your kids, okay? So you can just say, like, well, we're children, so we're, you guys are very, very young. But if you want to talk about, the best bull market of all time is your own kids. And the happiness and the unbelievable joy that my children bring to me every single day is absolutely off the charts. And why? Because they can teach me so much. And that's why I'm so appreciative of the culture that you guys have here. And a couple of years ago, I was quoted in the New York Times, and they wanted to know what my feelings were about mentorship. I said, I think that's, I can't get my head around mentorship because it implies that if you're older, you're smarter and wiser, and if you're younger, you know less, right? So it's always going to be that a younger person is going to be mentored by an older person. And I said, I want to create a different model, and we called it co-mentorship, which is I'm going to approach the relationship as an equal. So if there is a young gal in our network who is 21 years old and is a senior in college, I can learn as much from her as she can learn from me. And I said, I am hopeful that she will accept me as a co, right? And not that I'm the mentee and that she's the mentor. And what we saw happening, right, was this massive shift, massive generational shift, where so much of the knowledge, so much of what was great about technology was coming from the younger generations, right? And so we got way out ahead of that, right? Because I don't want to be caught sitting back going like, well, let's see, whatever worked 20 years ago probably still is applicable today. Well, guess what? It isn't, right? And one of the coolest things that just inspires me to come here, is the focus on health. And one of the guys that worked with Jim Lehrer is a guy by the name of Tony Schwartz. They wrote a book together, and one of the concepts that I'll never forget is after about 90 minutes, you should stop doing whatever you're doing. You get up, go walk around, run around, do something, right? And it was the first time anybody really ever thought about healthy employees. I will tell you, when I was on the trading floor at Goldman, you couldn't see your hand in front of your face because of the smoke, right? This is way before, New York City and everybody changed the laws about smoking. So you're a big, huge open area, right? And you're going like, I can't see. That was one of the only bad parts about being there, right? So this is a different generation. The focus is different. The opportunity is different, but at the end of the day, the things that matter, right, are ageless. They still matter. It's all about the team. It's all about trust. It's all about integrity. And if you ever think that it isn't about those things, that we're living in such a new world, right? Just trust me. And I mean that, literally, right? These are the things that will carry you through your entire life. They also are what keep you anchored, right? And one of the coolest things about getting old, because people always say, well, how do you feel about getting old, right? Thinking, wow, what a bummer, right? One of the coolest things is that you get to build on your own experience, your own body of wisdom, right? But you have to have some basic core operating principles, right, that guide you, right? And that probably sounds like really quaint, but it's really, really true. It's like a compass setting, right? And the way I navigate through my life is to always have, a core operating set of principles, that kind of keep me, sort of like literally right down the middle of the fairway as much as possible. So on that note, I am now going to be quiet.
So we have people from New York. I don't know if you want to start even with San Francisco, London, or Boston with questions for Janet. Kevin from London, any questions?
Not here, Charlie.
Anyone from Boston?
I have a question. Hi, thank you so much for coming to speak with us. It's truly inspiring as a young woman to hear about your success and just like the path that you've taken, especially like I was a poli-sci major in college, so I know that sort of mentality, like getting out of college and sort of finding yourself is difficult. So hearing your path is like very inspiring for me personally. And so I want to know first, who inspires you on a daily basis? And as a follow-up question, what do you do to continue your education on a daily basis and keep your mind sharp?
Well, that's a
Thank
tough
you.
one. Thank you. That's a very interesting question because, I'm no longer at Goldman, and Milestone was sold a couple of years ago. I'm not at Lehman anymore, right? So how do you keep yourself mentally agile, right? Well, I'm sort of the head poobah of 85 Broads. And, we have, I'm probably a little too close to that, we have roughly 30,000 women in this network worldwide, and I would encourage all of you gals to join. It's really an amazing network. We have chapters in 36 different locations around the world. And I think just like anything, people want to be inspired. And Andy Ratcliffe made a very interesting comment. He said, with the explosion of the internet, the overload of content is pretty significant. And so finding, the voice, that you feel that you can learn from, rather than just, it's more kind of mindless, noise, I think is really important. So the person who has inspired me the most over the last 2 decades is Kathleen Kennedy Townsend. And we became very good friends back in the early 90s when she was running for, she was Lieutenant Governor of the state of Maryland, and then she was running for governor. And I thought Kathleen was one of the most extraordinary women I had ever met. President Kennedy was assassinated when I was 11. That was the single biggest event in my generation's lives. And so meeting Kathleen was extraordinary. And I found her courage and her charisma and her, ability to keep finding, positive things to think about and to do was just so life-affirming for me. She also wrote the first dedication in our book. But I try to find people who are going to inspire me because they're fearless. And it doesn't have to be, like Alison Levine is one of the most fearless women I know. She actually climbed Mount Everest, and she failed. She was 286 vertical feet from the top before she was forced to turn back. So that was in 2002. And then at age 44, she went back in 2010, and this time she made it to the summit. I mean, I think that's nuts, right? But I love her story. I love her courage. So I think what keeps me mentally agile are the women in this network and the conversations that we have globally, which is an extraordinary conversation, because we're multi-generational, multicultural, multi-everything. And I like to think that there are companies where it is a much more holistic approach, which is this whole concept around, we want you to be the best, sort of a peak performer in every aspect of your life. And the other thing I will tell you, and this is, I asked the question, there isn't a question, so I'll just answer it, right? Is this whole concept of the glass is half full versus half empty. And I find that being athletic, running, anything that involves some physical effort, right, is must fire up a whole bunch of stuff in my brain. It just makes me happy. And so making the connection, I think for me, this is very personal, is how do I keep myself operating at the highest happy level that I can? Because when I'm happy, I'm inspired, I am involved, I am, I want to learn new things, and I think there's so many aspects to why a person is happy, but it's this reluctance to ever believe that the glass actually is half empty, right? I don't ever want to think that I'm going to live a day where I'm going to look at that glass or this bottle of water and go like, that's half empty. To me, it's half full. And I think that having that mindset, is something that you really have to practice. And as dumb as that sounds, it really is true. It's something that I have had to work at, throughout my life, because there can be all kinds of setbacks. You can have personal setbacks, you can have family setbacks. In 2002, so I'm like riding about as high as possible. Milestone's huge, everything's fabulous, right? And out of the blue, out of nowhere, I was diagnosed with cancer. So I was like, oh, here, right? And I was doing everything. I mean, I was in top shape, which also I think I really do attribute to why I survived, because I was in really, really good shape, both mentally and physically. And so then I was like, okay, that's it for me, right? Do the cancer thing, then I'll get over that, right? There's all kinds of fallout from when you have cancer, actually, right? So you can get knocked down a couple more times because, maybe your doctor says, well, you need to be on this medication, and then you need to be on this medication, and maybe you need to be on 5 other ones, right? And so all of a sudden you're not in control anymore, right? And then you have to have all those things that you have practiced throughout your whole life really kick in, right? Those are the things that save you, right? So it's not just your docs, it's not just, your team, your family, whatever. It's actually whatever inner reservoir of strength and courage you have. And I absolutely believe with all my heart, that it was Kathleen's influence on me. It was surrounding myself with people who had to be brave against extraordinary circumstances at some point in their life. And I think that's it's really a choice. I really, really believe with all my heart that it's a choice. And I just chose, not only to survive, but to thrive. Because I'm saying to myself, life is really not worth living if you can't thrive. And when I come into this building, when I have the pleasure and the honor to come here, right, I can feel energy, right? The karma in this place is outrageous. And I think it's because you have somebody at the helm who really cares about you. And the one conversation that is part of the glass full, half empty is, where are women sort of in the general scheme of things? Are there any women in the C-suite? Are there, it's all about the team. Because people ask me that constantly. How were you treated at Goldman, right? Were you discriminated against? I was like, no. And maybe that's not the popular response. Maybe I'm supposed to go like, well, now that I think about it, right? Well, the true answer was, I felt like I was the luckiest human being on the planet because I had the coolest job, I worked with the coolest people, and I kind of never forgot on any given day, right, that I had been given this extraordinary opportunity that about 99.9% of the planet would never have, right? So I felt like I was playing for the Yankees, right? I think you guys might be Mets fans, but you know, it was very cool.
Questions from New York?
Hi, 2 questions. What are you reading these days, whether blogs or books or any websites you tend to go to, and what do you think is next for yourself professionally?
So what am I reading? Okay, because I spend my life in my car, so I'm actually now living between Bedford, our office is in Greenwich, Nantucket, and New York City, and then my son is in Hanover, New Hampshire. So I read books on audio.
Okay.
So I just read Walter Isaacson's book, a biography of Albert Einstein. And it's absolutely fascinating. And right before that, I read Steve Jobs' biography, which Walter Isaacson also wrote. I'm right now listening to Bill Clinton's book, right? I find that nonfiction is fascinating when you're driving, right? It's like a history lesson. It's really very wonderful. So I tend to read nonfiction. I don't, because I said to myself, I have a limited amount of time, right? Sort of in total. So I prefer nonfiction as opposed to fiction. And then what's next? You know, I give, you know, do talks and stuff like that, but it's mostly 85 broads. I mean, I work 7 days a week. Not 24/7, maybe 12/7, but it's a full-time job. It's and what it is, it's me engaging with a global audience, and it's you remember that old RCA? You know, the dog was there, and you know they did the ping, and then you know, the dog was like listening, and you could hear the radiograph or telegraph or whatever it was, right? So I listen through 85 broads to all these fabulous women, and so we might be having a conversation with somebody in Pakistan, we might be having a conversation with somebody in Tel Aviv, we might be having a conversation with someone in Sao Paulo, right? So I'm getting a global perspective on pretty much everything, every day. Yes.
So you said when you attended Wheaton, you found that women didn't really want to help each other out and didn't get along in the way that you expected. But what changed? What was kind of the path from that understanding of women's relationships to 85 Broads, which seems to be exactly the opposite?
Which is a great question. So it's how do you go from Mean Girls, right? And it was all the drama. I think it was we were bored. I mean, God, we were in Norton, Mass, right? There was a gas station, a post office, and that was it.
I'm from nearby and attended Wellesley, so I have a similar.
Norton's worse.
Yeah, yes. I'll give you that.
But I see this is another one of these compass settings, right? It's basically your core operating set of principles, which is something, quite frankly, that Joe Gregory said to me that just absolutely chilled me. So when I first got to Lehman Brothers, and I was there to say, okay, we want to bring in all these great women, and he said, the 2 most senior women just took each other out publicly. He said it was brutal. And he looked at me and he said, Janet, when are women going to realize that if they don't support each other, they've just given guys a free pass, right? So I was like, whoa, right? And so the whole core tenet of 85 Broads is not women supporting each other, right? Because that's sort of somewhat handicapped. That means that you're sort of coming to the table. You already got 10 strikes against you, right? It's leveraging each other's extraordinary intellectual capital, right? And I actually had the first women's conference at Goldman Sachs. Check this out, this is before probably most of you guys were born. November 1st, 1985. And so the partners said, why should we let you do this? I said, because you trust me, that's why. And it was hugely successful. But again, think about that. We had all the partners come. Of course, all the partners were male, right? They came at the end of the day. They were very nervous, right? We were like, relax. Really nice women, right? And so I think it's the friendship, it's the collegial thing. But boy, oh boy, I tell you, if there was one thing that came out of my experience at Lehman Brothers, it literally happened the first day I was there, because I never thought about that. And that doesn't mean that guys don't misbehave. They do, right? But it was an amazing statement that if guys said, well, women basically, they're just like mean to each other, right? It goes like all the way back to high school, right? Then we're not going to take you seriously. I almost fell over. I really did. So it's be caught in the act of helping, right? And what the power of 85 Broads really is, it's access to critical information in a timely way. Which means if I have information that I know is going to help that person, right? I can't deliver it fast enough. And so once you have established that that's what you're there to do, you own it. You totally own it, right? But it also comes back to, and this is where, you say like, okay, Jana, that's really nice. That's like really Pollyanna of you. Like, whoa, right? It comes totally down. It goes back to what I was saying about having an insatiable curiosity in what somebody is doing. The basis for that relationship should be around learning, right? So if there's a guy who's doing something that you think is really cool, like he's developing an application, right, or he's coding in some really cool language, right? I mean, if it were me, I'd be like, dude, you gotta show me how to do that, right? And I think, again, it goes back to something that's so basic and it's so simple. Again, I don't have a PhD in anything, right? But this seems it's just utterly, totally obvious to me, right? Which is it's respectful. There you go. Any guys? Any guys want to ask me any questions? How many of you guys have kids?
No way. I did have one question on this. Earlier you mentioned how important networking was to your career. With today's massive amount of information via networking, LinkedIn, Facebook, how do you think that affects our generation's networking skills and capabilities? Because relationships are a dime a dozen nowadays. Like I still have connections with friends from high school that really will never do anything for my life, but it's not the same touch, but at the same time, it makes a lot of relationships a little more shallow, especially how do you think about that?
That is such an awesome, great question. It's a great question. And here's where discipline is involved, okay? It's what is known in asset management as style drift, right? So let's say that your investment style, how you have gotten people to give you money to invest, as you say, okay, or a macro fund. But then all of a sudden you see something else that looks really interesting, so you go, well, maybe we'll try that, right? I think the key is, and that's what's happening, because it's kind of like everybody's got ADD, right? So if I'm like looking at an email that somebody pops up and is now following me, I'm like, oh, Jesus, I want to cry because I don't know what to do, right? So I think to myself, so do I just like follow them automatically, or is there anything about that person? I mean, it makes me crazy, right? It makes me crazy. Then people will like try to friend me on Facebook. I'm like, who are you? Right? And I don't know the etiquette around LinkedIn. Like somebody, I got a request yesterday to be to be introduced to somebody. For me to introduce them. I'm like, who are you? Right? So you guys, this is all, you guys own the world, by the way. If you ever really, really want to, okay, just forget Wall Street, occupy the entire world. It's people like me, right? Who are overwhelmed, right? Now I'm terrified because I know I'll never catch up. So I'm just gonna like not even bother to try. But the key is, what are you interested in, right? What are you interested in? What absolutely gets you really stoked, right? Is it mountain climbing? Is it bungee jumping? Is it learning more about your family tree, right? You have to know what it is that matters to you, right? Because what will happen otherwise, right? You will become incredibly boring because you won't have anything to say, right? Because the airwaves just churning out content, right? So being able to know the difference between what matters, what's additive, right, and what isn't, that's a job in and of itself, right? So it's who do you want to have conversations with? I mean, the thing that fascinates me now, there are all these websites, right, where you can find people of common interest, and then I don't even want to go there because I'm going to hurt myself, right? But I think in many, many ways, the tools that underlie, that are underlie technology can actually help people find other people of common, who have common interests and stuff. I think that's like the best answer I can give. For me, it's never really an issue, because the two people that fascinate me the most in my life are my two children. And so I'll give you a perfect for instance. So my son's a squash player. He's one of the top squash players in the United States. He's top 5 college, top 2 American, college American, that's right. So he's constantly playing at a very high level, so his performance level is off the charts. And he's probably going to turn pro when he graduates from college. So he called me yesterday, and the squash season is now just kind of wrapping up. The individual championships are this weekend at Amherst College. So he lost to the number 2 guy yesterday. He lost in 3, right? So the guy just like spanked him, right? And I love this other kid, right? But Chris wanted to talk to me, right, about how you lose well, right? And what's fascinating is that every single time you have an interaction with somebody, right, or have a new experience, then there has to be some, again, sort of operating guidelines, right? And so what he was looking to me for was, out of your vast experience, Mom, right, how do I deal with losing, right? And how do I sort of incorporate into my life experience, which is because I don't want to sit here and go like, okay, now I'm a loser, right? It's fascinating. And when you're operating at that high a level where you're expected to excel, right? It's really, really important that you have very smart people around you who really thoughtfully are going to be all about the care and feeding of your soul. Really, that's what we're talking about here. And you guys are forget A players, it's like A++, right? So you guys are all, super, super good at what you do, super, super smart, right? But what Chris was basically saying was, yes, and he also is a very bright young man, right? So there's pressure on him. And some of it's self-induced and some of it comes from outside, right? So what the hope is, that somebody is going to make wise decisions on behalf of themselves, which then they take with them throughout their life, and then they will teach to somebody else, right? But it's that amazing moment in any given day, right, where you have to make a decision. And if you ask yourself, count up sometime how many decisions you actually have to make in the course of any one given day. It's mind-blowing, right? That would be an interesting little exercise, right? And it's not the, do I rob the bank, don't rob the bank, coin flip, right? It's a series of, minor, major calls. You have to make the call, right? I really find that fascinating. So, anyway, what time is it? Because we
I
know
think
it-
we feel like one more question. Anybody? What do you have?
It's San Francisco.
Okay. Oh, San Francisco. Go ahead.
What do you think is one behavior or trait of women which you think might derail their career, or one mistake they do that might go wrong for them?
And that's a great last question to end on. So the question is, what would derail a woman's career? I'll tell you what derailed mine. It was that I had this incredible 11-year run. I was managing, it was the first female sales manager in Goldman's history. And I was completely overwhelmed. And after a year, I was completely burned out. And there were no controls. There were no sort of, you've been working 18-hour days, you're here in the office on weekends, you're the first one here at 6 o'clock in the morning, you're the last person to leave, then you go out with clients, then you do it again, night after night after night. What's it doing to you? What it's doing to your health, blah, 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 right? So the way to derail your career, and this is specific to women only because I am a female, it could happen to anybody, is I made the executive decision to leave. So one day I walked into David Ford's office and I said, I'm leaving. And he was like, why are you leaving? And they actually had to make up a story because they couldn't actually issue a press release saying Janet Hanson is leaving because she's really burned out. So they came up with this I still have this memo. She's leaving to open a marina with her father. And John Corzine, who's been in the news of late, was one of my bosses in fixed income. And he said to me, this was about 2 or 3 years later, he said, why didn't you come to me? Why? He said, this is really how women derail their careers, right? If I just said, okay, if I'm not perfect all the time, that's what they expect of me, that's what I have to deliver. If I can't do that, if I feel that I'm going to fail because I'm exhausted, well, I guess I should leave, right? That was a disastrous decision. Disastrous, because I came back to Goldman 2 years, I left, and then I said, okay, I'm going to become a triathlete. All right, I'm not even going to go there. It's in the book. If you ever want to read the book, you can buy it for 40 cents on Amazon, as I said, right? So that, I failed at that. So I went back to Goldman Sachs in 1991, and by then I had 2 kids, and Jeff and I were broke, because I'd never saved a single penny, not a dime, when I was at Goldman. Of course not, right? Because I said, oh, I'm going to become a partner, I'll be very rich, and then everything will work out fine. So, but Jeff and I were broke, we had 2 kids. So I went to Goldman because I was the one person that could get hired, right? My career was over. Back at the same firm, right? John said, well, you can't come back to fixed income because, well, the guy who took over for you happily is now a partner, right? So I had to try to reinvent myself over in asset management, and this all could have been avoided if I had been smart enough, right, And you can say, well, is that HR? You go to speak to somebody in HR? No, right? You go to your bosses and you talk about, what's important to you, but you do it way before you're messed up, right? And so the way you derail your career is to make a decision, without the guidance of the people that you work with, and then it all comes back to trust. But in my case, I was too embarrassed, right? So I just said, well, I'll just leave, and because I don't want people to feel sorry for me because I don't know what to do, right? That had disastrous consequences on my career path. And we can say, well, but then you reinvented yourself. Yes, I did. But I will always be haunted by John saying, why didn't you come to me, right? We could have worked something out. And I've heard that story 1,000 times since then, but it had a happy ending, where somebody said, that's exactly what I did, because I was either over my head doing something, or there were other things happening in my life that all of a sudden upset that very fragile balance. And, so the thing that I would leave you with is, you guys should be best friends. And, believe with all your heart that the best people, that Next Jump could possibly field are in this room and in these offices right now. And if you take an investment approach, which is that you expect to earn a return on your time here, on your friendships, right, on what you learn, on what you get to do, but at the end of the day, really, I gotta tell you, just remember how lucky you are, right? And it doesn't have to be sort of the like, well, yeah, because there are an awful lot of people in the world who are not lucky, right? The greatest day I ever had was the day that I realized that I had opportunity, right? And that if I really said, okay, I'm one of the luckiest people on the planet because I've been given this opportunity, and the best friend I have is my brain, right? And so how I choose to use it and how I use to leverage my own intellectual capital is something that I 100% control. And, you guys are, you rock, as I love to say. So happy afternoon. Thank you.